right before a typical fifth grade overnight school trip, pediatric waiting rooms suddenly experience this massive predictable flood of panicked parents.
Yeah, it's like clockwork.
It really is. And, you know, they aren't bringing their kids in for a sudden virus.
Yeah.
They aren't there for, like, a sports injury.
Right.
They're sitting in those waiting rooms, usually looking, well, highly uncomfortable because they are trying to hide a secret.
A very deeply kept family secret.
Exactly. And there's this immovable, impending social deadline, right? A trip where 30 kids will be sleeping in the exact same room and that is about to force that secret out into the harsh light of day.
Which is terrifying for them.
Oh, absolutely terrifying. So today, you and I are going to step into a space that most people really only talk about in hushed tones behind closed doors, if they even talk about it at all.
Mostly they don't.
Right. We're doing a deep dive into a phenomenon that usually just remains this tightly kept family secret until some looming, unavoidable event just forces it out.
And, you know, the psychology of that waiting room is fascinating. It highlights a really massive blind spot in how we view childhood development.
How so?
Well, we have this tendency to categorize growing up into very neat, isolated boxes. So in one box, we put physical milestones, you know, like learning to walk, losing teeth, mastering the toilet.
Right, the body stuff.
Exactly, the body box. And then in a totally separate box, we place cognitive and neurological development, learning to read, regulating emotions, paying attention in class.
The brain box.
You got it.
Yeah.
We treat the body and the brain like they exist in two completely different jurisdictions that just never interact.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
It is. But what happens when a deeply guarded family secret, something everyone just assumes is a standard physical hurdle, is actually, you know, a direct window into the complex wiring of a child's neurological development?
And that is exactly the core of what we're unpacking today. We're looking at notes from a really illuminating seminar report by Latalico.
Yeah, it's a great source.
Really good stuff. For those of you who aren't familiar, Latalico is this major organization based in Japan, and they're deeply involved in developmental support and education for neurodivergent individuals.
Right. They do a lot of ground-level practical support.
Exactly. So the data they gather is coming straight from the actual real-world experiences of families. And in this specific seminar, they featured insights from a Dr. Kure.
And his data is, well, it's eye-opening.
It completely shatters that artificial boundary between the brain box and the body box you were just talking about.
He really does.
So we're going to explore the statistical connection between neurodevelopmental disorders, specifically ADHD and ASD, and physical struggles with incontinence, meaning bedwetting and daytime accidents.
And I think it's important to set our overarching mission for this deep dive right away.
Oh, definitely. What's the main goal here?
Well, Dr. Kure's presentation and our discussion today isn't just about looking at the medical mechanics of the bladder.
Right. It's not a biology class.
No, not at all. It's to explore how understanding this very specific, incredibly stigmatized physical connection is literally the absolute key to protecting a child's self-esteem.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge stakes claim.
It is, because we're dealing with a topic that is just heavily laden with cultural baggage. Bedwetting and daytime accidents are almost universally viewed through a lens of discipline.
Oh, 100%. People assume it reflects, like, the child's maturity or their laziness.
Or the parent's failure to properly potty train them.
Right. You just weren't strict enough.
Exactly. But by bringing Dr. Kure's data into the light, we're taking something that has historically been viewed as this behavioral failing, and we're repositioning it as a neurological reality.
Okay, I love that. So I want to start where the source material starts, with that vivid, frantic picture of the waiting room.
The rush to the clinic.
Yes. The Latalico notes specifically call out this phenomenon, framing it around the rush just before these overnight school trips. Let's really put ourselves in that scenario for a second. You have a child who has been struggling with nocturnal enuresis, which is, you know, the clinical term for bedwetting at home.
Right.
And it's stressful for the family, sure. There's a ton of laundry. But it's contained.
It's a private struggle.
Exactly. It exists within the safe, private walls of the family home. But then the school calendar marches on. Suddenly there's a scheduled overnight field trip.
A sleepaway camp or a class trip to, like, a historical site.
Right. And the environment is about to change from a private bedroom where evidence can be quietly washed away in the morning to a shared sleeping bag right next to a classmate.
And the stakes fundamentally shift in that exact moment. It transforms from a private management issue to a totally public social crisis.
Right, and the parents just panic. They flood the clinics right before the trip. It feels akin to cramming for a final exam. But the stakes aren't a letter grade on a piece of paper,
No, the stakes are a child's entire social standing among their peers.
which is wild. Imagine being a kid dreading what should objectively be the most fun trip of the entire school year, simply because you are terrified of failing to hide this.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. But here's the question that really jumps out at me when reading this source. If this has been an ongoing issue for months or even years, why wait until the week before the camping trip to see a doctor?
That's the real question.
What does this, deadline rush tell us about how society handles this whole thing?
Well, when you analyze the sociology behind that delay, it reveals a deeply ingrained cultural pattern regarding invisible struggles.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The delay tells us that families are enduring this in total silence because they have internalized the societal message that this is somehow their fault.
Oh, wow. So they blame themselves.
Completely. They don't seek medical intervention early on because they don't even view it as a medical issue. They view it as a personal failing.
So they're afraid of the doctor's reaction, too.
Exactly. The fear of judgment from the pediatrician, the fear of being told, you just aren't being strict enough, or your child is just being lazy. That fear actively keeps them away from the clinic.
The stigma is actually stronger than the desire for a solution, at least until the social deadline forces their hand.
And that is the tragedy of the situation. The issue remains completely invisible until a communal event makes it structurally impossible to hide any longer.
The secret's going to get out either way.
Right. At that point, the imminent risk of peer exposure suddenly outweighs the lingering stigma of seeking medical help.
Which means families are just white-knuckling through years of stress.
Years. Managing disrupted sleep, damaged self-worth, and only turning to professionals when they need an emergency fix.
Wow. They're seeking a quick medical patch for a looming social problem rather than addressing it as a fundamental developmental support need early on.
Precisely. They aren't walking into the doctor's office saying, I want to understand the unique way my child's body and brain communicate.
Right. They're walking in saying, I need my kid to survive the trip to Washington, D.C. next week without getting bullied. Give me a pill. Give me a strategy. Give me anything.
And that motivation prioritizing social preservation over physiological investigation is exactly what Dr. Kure's data forces the medical community to dismantle.
Because the demographics of that waiting room are telling a very different story.
Exactly. When those desperate families finally do sit in the clinic and pediatricians start looking closely at who actually makes up that rush, a highly, highly significant pattern emerges.
So let's get into that pattern, because this is where the assumptions about behavior just start to totally fall apart.
Yes, let's look at the numbers.
Dr. Kure's seminar reveals that children with developmental disorders have a remarkably high frequency of urination and defecation troubles.
The numbers are staggering.
They really are. Let's look at the first major statistic from the notes. Approximately 20% of children with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, experience nocturnal enuresis.
1 in 5.
1 in 5 kids with ADHD is wetting the bed.
That is a statistical correlation that simply cannot be ignored. It pulls the issue entirely out of the realm of, inconsistent parenting and drops it squarely into the realm of neurobiology.
Okay, I am looking at that statistic, and I'm honestly trying to square it with how we culturally define ADHD.
It's tough because our cultural definition is so flawed.
Right. If you ask the average person on the street to describe a kid with ADHD, what do they say?
They say it's a kid who bounces off the walls.
Exactly. They describe a kid who can't sit still at the dinner table, a child who blurts out answers in class, loses their homework, just endless energy.
Daytime distraction.
Yes. The defining traits in the public imagination are boundless energy, constant movement, and, being awake. You don't naturally think of what happens while that child is completely unconscious, fast asleep in the dark.
You really don't.
So how does a disorder defined by attention and hyperactivity translate into a physical lack of bladder control while the child is sleeping? I'm really struggling to see the mechanism there.
Well, the disconnect you're feeling comes from the fact that the name attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is actually a very poor, very surface level descriptor of what is actually happening in the brain.
Oh, really?
Yeah, ADHD is not simply a deficit of attention, nor is it just a surplus of energy. It is fundamentally a neurological condition that affects executive function.
Executive function, okay.
Yes, and how the central nervous system regulates signals.
So let's let's pause and define executive function for the listener in this context, because we hear that term thrown around a lot in, education and psychology.
Sure. Executive function is essentially the brain's management system. It's a set of mental skills that include working memory, flexible thinking, and self-control.
The stuff we use every day.
Exactly. We use these skills every single day to learn, work, and manage daily life. But crucially, executive function is responsible for filtering and prioritizing information.
Okay, filtering and prioritize.
Right. It decides which signals the brain should pay attention to and which signals it should inhibit or just ignore.
Okay, so it's like the conductor of the orchestra deciding who plays loudly and who stays quiet.
That's a perfect way to put it. Now, I want you to think about the central nervous system as a highly complex biological relay network.
Okay, tracking with you.
In a neurotypical brain, there is a constant, seamless communication loop between the body and the brain. And this loop remains active even during deep sleep.
So the brain is always listening, even when we're out cold.
Exactly. When the bladder fills up during the night, the physical stretching of the bladder wall sends an electrical signal
Up the spinal cord?
up the nerves of the spinal cord straight to the brainstem.
So the body's basically sending a status report.
Right. The brain receives that signal, and its management system, the executive function, has to make a decision. In a typical scenario, it does one of two things.
What are the options?
Well, it might secrete an antidiuretic hormone to slow down urine production, which allows the child to just sleep through the night.
Okay, that's option A.
Or, option B, if the bladder is completely at capacity, the brain sends an urgent, overriding wake-up signal to the conscious mind. It forces the child to rouse from sleep.
So it acts like a fire alarm. The management system says, emergency in the plumbing department, wake up and walk to the bathroom immediately.
Exactly. But in a brain with ADHD, the neurological pathways responsible for regulation, for recognizing those subtle signals, and shifting states of arousal, they are wired differently.
Okay, this is where the disconnect happens.
Right. The issue isn't that the bladder's broken. The bladder sends the I'm full signal up the spinal cord perfectly fine.
The hardware works.
The hardware is fine, but the sleeping brain, whose management system already struggles with filtering and prioritizing impulses while awake,
Yeah.
it essentially fails to register this internal alarm bell while asleep. The signal from the bladder does not punch through the arousal threshold required to wake the child's conscious mind.
Oh, wow. So the switchboard is basically unmanned. The physical signal arrives at the brain, but the executive function doesn't process it as an emergency requiring action.
Exactly. The subconscious neurological signaling required to rouse a child from deep sleep simply does not translate into conscious action.
It just gets dropped.
It gets dropped. So, when we look back at that 20% statistic, 1 in 5 kids with ADHD struggling with bedwetting, it is a direct physiological manifestation of how their specific brain manages signaling.
That is mind-blowing.
It makes perfect biological sense. If the brain's management system has differences in regulating responses to external stimuli during the day, it's entirely logical that it would have differences in regulating internal biological stimuli during the night.
That reframes the entire nighttime dynamic. I mean, it's not that the child doesn't care. It's not that they're too lazy to get out of their warm bed and walk down the cold hallway to the bathroom.
No, not at all.
Their brain literally never delivered the memo to their conscious mind that the bladder was full. The physical mail was sent, but the cognitive mailroom lost it in transit.
That's exactly what happens.
And yet, think about the reality for those kids in that 20% bracket. How many of them wake up to frustrated parents sighing, stripping the bed and saying, you need to try harder, or you're too old to be doing this?
Way too many. And the tragic part is you cannot try harder to receive a subconscious neurological signal while you are clinically unconscious.
Right. You can't willpower your way out of sleep.
You cannot willpower your way out of a neurobiological signaling delay. The child has as much control over waking up to that signal as they do over their own heartbeat.
Which is zero.
Zero control. And this fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanism is why that rush to the clinic before the school trip is so fraught with anxiety and shame.
Because the parents think it's a behavior issue.
Exactly. The parents, understandably lacking this medical context, are looking for a behavioral fix for a structural neurological reality.
Okay, so that outlines the nighttime reality for kids with ADHD perfectly. But Dr. Kure's seminar report presents a second set of data that shifts the landscape entirely, right? It moves us from the night into the day.
Yes, the daytime data is equally profound.
Because, while ADHD is closely linked to these nocturnal issues, the source presents a completely different set of statistics for children on the autism spectrum, or ASD.
And the data on ASD highlights a totally different mechanism and a vastly different set of daily social challenges.
Let's get into the numbers. According to the source, children with ASD experience daytime urinary incontinence at a rate of approximately 16% to 37%.
Which is huge.
It's massive. And it notes that broader data suggests general-related urination and defecation issues can affect up to 75% of this demographic.
Up to 75%, just let that sink in. The fact that 16% to 37% of children with ASD are experiencing these issues during the day is a critical piece of data that demands we look at sensory processing.
Okay, let's just pause and acknowledge the drastic shift in the stakes here for the listener.
Absolutely.
We spent the first part of this deep dive talking about the intense anxiety of an overnight school trip. But nighttime bedwetting is fundamentally hidden in a bedroom for 360 days of the year.
It's private most of the time.
Exactly. But daytime incontinence, that means the child is navigating a social minefield every single day of their life.
Every single day.
They're sitting at a desk in a classroom. They're standing in line for the cafeteria, participating in gym class. A daytime accident is not a secret you can quietly wash away.
No, it is an immediate, highly visible, real-time social event.
The potential for immediate peer judgment and bullying is constant.
The stakes are exponentially higher during the day because the environment is profoundly unforgiving and highly scrutinized by peers.
Middle school is brutal.
Oh, it's the worst. So we need to break down the difference between the ADHD nighttime scenario, which occurs in an unconscious state, and the ASD daytime scenario, which occurs in a conscious, active state.
Right. If the child is fully awake, sitting in math class, why are they experiencing incontinence at such high rates? Because the unmanned switchboard analogy we used for sleep doesn't really apply if the child is sitting there with their eyes open, actively doing a worksheet, right?
Exactly. It's a different mechanism. To understand the waking mechanism, we have to explore a sensory concept that is fundamentally altered in many individuals on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
We need to look closely at a sense called interoception.
Interception. Okay, most of us learn about the 5 basic senses in kindergarten.
Right.
Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. Walk us through interoception.
So, neurologists and occupational therapists often refer to interoception as the 8th sense.
The 8th sense.
Right. If exteroception, those 5 basic senses, is how we perceive the outside world, interoception is how we perceive the internal state of our own bodies.
Okay, so feeling what's going on inside.
Yes. It is the sensory network of receptors located throughout our internal organs, muscles, and skin that sends constant updates to the brain about our physiological condition.
Give me an example.
Interoception is the system that tells you when you are hungry, when you are thirsty, when your heart is racing because you are nervous, when you are exhausted.
Right.
And crucially for this discussion, it tells you when your bladder or bowel is full.
Okay, so interoception is basically the internal dashboard of the human body. It's the collection of warning lights and gauges that tell us what is happening under the hood.
That is a very accurate way to conceptualize it. Now, for many people with ASD, sensory processing is atypical.
Right.
And this atypical processing can manifest in 2 main ways. It can be hypersensitive, where external stimuli like the hum of fluorescent lights or the texture of a clothing tag are overwhelmingly painfully intense.
We hear about that a lot with ASD, the tags on shirts, loud noises.
Exactly. But it can also be hyposensitive.
Hyposensitive.
Yeah.
Meaning undersensitive.
Right, where the nervous system requires significantly more stimulation to register a sensation at all. If a child with ASD has a hyposensitive interoceptive system, they might simply not feel the internal bodily cue of a full bladder.
So the signal's just too weak.
The bladder is physically stretching, the internal mechanism is working perfectly, but the sensory translation of that stretching to the conscious brain is muted or entirely absent.
Oh, wow. They literally do not know they have to go until the physical capacity is breached and it is too late.
Exactly. They're not stubbornly ignoring the urge to go to the bathroom.
The urge simply never arrived on their internal dashboard.
Never even registered.
It's like driving a car down the highway where the gas gauge is completely disconnected from the tank.
Oh, that's good.
Right. The car is absolutely going to run out of gas. The physics of the tank emptying are happening, but the driver has absolutely zero warning until the engine just sputters and dies.
Right.
You can't blame the driver for not pulling over for gas if the dashboard was reading full the entire time.
That analogy perfectly isolates the sensory disconnect. You literally can't act on information you don't have.
Right.
But the data Dr. Kure presents shows a very wide variance, remember, from 16% up to 37%.
Yeah, that's a big swing.
To understand that large range, we have to look at the other side of the autistic sensory experience beyond just a muted signal.
Okay, what else is happening?
We have to look at how attention is allocated, specifically a concept called monotropism.
Monotropism. Okay, how does that factor into daytime accidents?
Monotropism is a cognitive strategy common in autism where the brain tends to focus its attention intensely on a small number of interests or external stimuli at any given time.
So like hyperfocus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A child with ASD might be engaging in an activity, building a complex structure, reading a book about a special interest, or even just trying to decode the complex social dynamics of a group project.
Right.
And their brain allocates almost all of its processing bandwidth to that specific external stimulus.
I want to push back on this a little bit just to make sure we're drawing the line clearly between neurology and behavior here.
Sure, go ahead.
Let's say a kid is hyper-focused on a video game, right?
Right.
Building this intricate world, and they have an accident while sitting on the couch. A frustrated parent might look at that and say, they know they have to go. They're just refusing to pause the game because they're having fun. It's defiance.
That is a very common reaction.
Right. So why is the parent wrong in that scenario? If the kid's brain is powerful enough to hyper-focus on building a whole digital city, why can't it focus on a simple bodily signal?
Well, the parent is misinterpreting the hierarchy of sensory processing there. The child is not consciously deciding, I feel the urge to urinate, but I am choosing to ignore it to play this game.
They are making a choice.
No. In a highly monotropic state, the internal signal of a full bladder might be firing, but the brain's executive function categorizes it as irrelevant background noise and actively filters it out in favor of the hyperfocus.
Wow.
The brain is dedicating 99% of its resources to the external cognitive engagement. The 1% of resources left is simply not enough to process the muted interoceptive signal.
So it's literally impossible for them to process it in that state.
Exactly. It is not defiance. It is a profound, involuntary prioritization of external stimuli over internal physiological maintenance.
You know, we've all experienced a very minor temporary version of this. Like when you are reading an incredibly gripping book and someone in the room says your name.
Yes.
And you genuinely do not hear them because your auditory processing was temporarily dialed down by your visual and cognitive focus.
That is exactly the mechanism.
But you are saying we need to amplify that by 100 and apply it not to someone saying your name, but to the internal signals of your own organs.
Yes. And we must also factor in the sheer cognitive load that a child with ASD is carrying in a standard school environment.
Oh, school must be exhausting.
A typical classroom is a sensory minefield for them. The child is constantly working to manage sensory overload from harsh lighting, echoing hallways, the chaotic movement of peers, the unpredictable bell schedules.
All while trying to learn math.
All while trying to meet academic demands. Their central nervous system is operating near its absolute maximum threshold just to maintain equilibrium.
So there's no bandwidth left.
Exactly. In that environment of high sensory noise, the subtle, quiet internal whisper of, your bladder is full, gets completely drowned out simply by the effort required to survive the school day.
That makes so much sense. So when a child with ASD has a daytime accident at school, it is highly likely the result of an overwhelmed sensory system filtering out the signal, or a chronically muted interoceptive system that never sent the signal clearly in the first place.
Right. It is not a behavioral regression. It is a sensory failure.
The body's hardware is fine, but the software prioritizing the alerts is just totally overloaded.
Recognizing this completely changes the paradigm of how adults should intervene.
And that brings us perfectly to the next critical phase of the Latalico notes, rewriting the narrative around interventions.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Because now that we understand these hard numbers,
Okay.
The 20% of ADHD kids struggling with nighttime signals, the up to 37% of ASD kids struggling with daytime sensory processing, we have to look really closely at how adults usually react.
And how our standard cultural reactions are doing a lot of damage.
Frankly, a ton of damage. In Dr. Kure's notes, the source makes a very pointed statement. It notes that the cause of these issues is not a simple, and while the sentence actually trails off in our excerpts, the context makes the implication unavoidable.
Right.
The data proves that the root cause goes far beyond simple behavioral choices, simple laziness, or simple lack of effort during potty training.
The word simple is really the linchpin of the whole problem here.
How do you mean?
Culturally, we desperately want continence to be simple. We view toilet training as a straightforward linear behavioral equation, right? You insert the training, You provide the motivation, and you achieve continence.
A equals B.
Exactly. And if continence is not achieved or maintained, society automatically assumes there is a failure in the variable of effort or discipline.
We assume the kid is acting out.
We assume the child is being defiant or the parents are being too lenient.
But if a teacher or a parent doesn't know about interoception, or they don't understand the delayed subconscious neurological signaling we talked about with ADHD, they are flying blind.
Completely blind.
Do they end up accidentally punishing a child for a biological misfire? Like if we treat a muted sensory dashboard as a discipline issue, what is the actual impact on the kid?
The impact is deeply, deeply destructive. When we fundamentally misunderstand the cause of an action, our interventions are not just ineffective. They become actively harmful to the child's psychological development.
Let's break down that harm using a real-world example, because I think that makes it clearer. Picture the standard go-to parenting toolkit for potty training issues, the sticker chart.
Oh, the sticker chart.
Right. If you stay dry tonight, you get a sticker. 5 stickers get you a toy. Or the punitive version. If you have an accident, you lose your screen time.
A very common approach.
So if we apply Dr. Kure's data to the sticker chart, why does that intervention fail so spectacularly?
Let's analyze the core assumption of the sticker chart. A behavioral reward system assumes that the child has conscious, voluntary control over the desired outcome and that they simply lack the motivation to execute it.
Right. It assumes they just don't care enough yet.
The chart provides the motivation. But as we have established, a child with ADHD who wets the bed is missing a subconscious neurological signal while asleep.
They're unconscious.
Offering them a sticker for waking up is like offering someone a sticker for voluntarily lowering their own core body temperature or changing their own heart rate while in REM sleep.
That's absurd.
It is. It is biologically impossible to willpower a subconscious process.
So the kid goes to sleep really wanting the toy. They wake up in wet sheets. Not only do they have the physical discomfort of the accident, but now they are hit with the crushing disappointment of losing the reward.
Exactly.
They failed a test, but no one ever gave them the study guide or taught them the material.
And consider the psychological narrative the child begins to write for themselves in that scenario.
It's got to be dark.
They internalize a deeply flawed message. They think, I am bad, I am failing, I am disappointing my parents and missing out on rewards, and I don't know how to stop doing it.
Because an 8-year-old doesn't have the medical vocabulary to say, Mother, my interoceptive sensory pathways are currently hyposensitive and my executive function is filtering out the somatic markers.
No, of course not. They just think they are broken.
Wow.
When adults treat incontinence in neurodivergent children as a behavioral issue, through scolding, exasperated sighs, taking away privileges, or even through overly enthusiastic reward systems that set them up for guaranteed failure, they are systematically eroding the child's sense of self-worth.
You are essentially gaslighting the child about their own biology. You are telling them repeatedly that they are actively choosing to do something over which they have absolutely no conscious control.
Gaslighting is exactly what it is.
That kind of cognitive dissonance has to be just exhausting for a kid.
It creates immense anxiety. And ironically, anxiety can further dysregulate the nervous system and make the physical issues even worse.
A vicious cycle.
Exactly. The implications of shifting our mindset away from this behavioral approach are just massive. When adults recognize that brain-bladder communication is an integral, highly vulnerable part of a developmental disorder, the entire intervention strategy changes.
You stop looking for a behavioral fix.
You rip the sticker chart off the fridge and throw it in the trash.
So what do you replace it with? If not discipline, then what?
You replace it with structural and medical support that addresses the actual neurological gap. Let's take the daytime issues with ASD, for example.
Okay, the interoception issues.
Right. If we know the child's interoceptive dashboard is unreliable, or that their monotropic focus is filtering out the bladder signal, we stop asking them to rely on an internal system that is failing them.
We stop waiting for them to tell us they need to go.
Yes. Instead, we externalize the executive function. We provide a structural support called timed voiding.
And timed voiding. How does that work in practice?
It is a strict external schedule. The adult sets a timer, and every 2 hours, regardless of whether the child feels the urge to go, the child goes to the restroom and tries.
Okay, so you remove the decision-making process entirely.
Exactly. You say, it is 10:00 a.m., this is a scheduled bathroom transition. By externalizing the prompt, you bypass the faulty internal sensory network entirely.
The child no longer has to parse their internal signals. They just follow the external structure.
Exactly.
It's like you build a ramp for their
Hey,
neurology.
that's a great metaphor.
If a child uses a wheelchair, you don't stand at the top of a staircase with a sticker chart and tell them to try harder to walk up the stairs.
Yeah.
You build a ramp to accommodate their physical reality.
Right.
In this case, the timed bathroom schedule is the cognitive ramp. It accommodates the invisible sensory reality.
And the moment you provide that structural support, the emotional friction just disappears.
It's no longer a battle of wolves.
The adult transitions from being a disciplinarian enforcing an impossible standard to being an ally managing a physiological condition alongside the child.
Okay, so that's the daytime. What about the nighttime ADHD issues?
For nighttime, the support might look like a bedwetting alarm.
Okay, wait. How does an alarm differ from a behavioral reward? Aren't they both just trying to train the kid?
They operate on entirely different principles. A bedwetting alarm detects the very first drop of moisture and immediately sounds a loud alarm or vibrates, waking the child up right as the bladder begins to contract.
So it interrupts the process.
Right. This isn't about motivation. It is about classical conditioning of the neural pathways. Over time, the alarm artificially pairs the physical sensation of a full bladder with the conscious state of being awake. It acts as a training wheel for the central nervous system.
Oh, wow.
It's helping the brain build the subconscious association that it is currently failing to make on its own.
It bridges the gap in the switchboard until the brain learns to recognize the signal itself.
Precisely.
That is fascinating. And it brings us full circle to the absolute core mission of this deep dive and really the overarching theme of the Latalico seminar's title.
Protecting self-esteem.
Exactly. We started by talking about the panic of the overnight school trip. But the ultimate goal of understanding this intricate relationship between neurodivergence and incontinence isn't just about reducing the laundry load or surviving a field trip.
No, not at all.
According to the source, the overarching goal is protecting the child's self-esteem.
Self-esteem is arguably the most critical metric of healthy childhood development. And yet, it is consistently the first casualty when developmental challenges are misunderstood by the adults in the room.
Right. Think about the internal narrative of a neurodivergent child. They are often already keenly aware that they are different.
Very aware.
They might struggle socially or academically or with sensory overload. Parents and supportive teachers spend countless hours helping a child with ADHD or ASD navigate their unique brain.
Celebrating their strengths, helping them manage their struggles.
Right. They work incredibly hard to build up the child's dignity and confidence. But a single public incident, a daytime accident in the middle of a cafeteria, or the humiliation of a bedwetting incident being discovered by peers on a school trip can devastate that confidence instantly.
It shatters it.
And even without a public incident, the constant daily friction of being scolded at home for something they cannot control acts like a slow, insidious cracking of their foundational self-worth.
It wears them down over years. And the data we've explored today answers the ultimate "so what?" for you, the listener.
What's the takeaway?
We began with families desperately rushing to the clinic before a deadline. They are desperate for a mechanical solution. But the profound realization here is that the true goal of those clinical visits and of understanding this science shouldn't just be about achieving a dry night.
Because the dry night is just a symptom.
The dry night is merely a logistical outcome. The actual objective is raising a confident, emotionally secure child who understands their own body.
Right. By understanding the deep biological links between ADHD, ASD, and how the body manages waste, caregivers possess the knowledge required to completely, unequivocally remove shame from the family dynamic.
Removing shame is everything. Validation becomes the most powerful medical intervention available.
How does that look in practice?
Validation through explanation is incredibly potent. Imagine the profound relief a child feels when an adult sits down with them and actively changes the narrative.
Just telling the truth.
Imagine a parent saying, "We went to the doctor and we learned something fascinating about how your brain works. Your brain is wired to be incredibly fast, or it is wired to focus incredibly deeply on the things you love to build.
Framing it as a positive.
But because your brain works so hard doing those amazing things, sometimes it gets distracted and misses the quiet signal your bladder sends. This isn't because you are lazy. It isn't because you are bad or acting like a baby. It is just a crossed wire in your nervous system. It is not your fault, and we're going to use alarms or schedules to help your brain and body communicate better."
I honestly get chills thinking about the impact of that specific conversation on an 8-year-old who has spent the last 2 years secretly hating themselves every morning when they wake up in wet sheets.
It changes their whole world.
You are handing them back their dignity. You are giving them a biological vocabulary for their struggle. You are telling them they aren't a broken person. They are just operating on a unique operating system.
And you are going to help them install the right updates to make the hardware run smoothly.
You are giving them the internal narrative they need to defend themselves against their own harsh self-criticism, right?
Right.
And against the inevitable misunderstandings they will face from the outside world.
Because when a child understands that their physical struggles are a mechanical issue of sensory processing rather than a moral failing of character, their self-esteem remains robust.
We can tackle it like a puzzle.
Yes. They can approach the logistical challenges of their neurodivergence with curiosity, problem-solving, and resilience, rather than hiding in shame and secrecy.
This has been a massive paradigm shift. We've covered a lot of ground today based on Dr. Kure's presentation at the Latalico seminar.
It's a lot of information, but it's so vital.
It is. We started by examining the very real sociological panic of overnight school trips. That pressure cooker moment where a private struggle threatens to become a public disaster, revealing how deeply stigmatized these issues are.
The clinic rush.
Right. And then we dug into the surprising, validating statistics. The 20% of kids with ADHD whose executive function fails to process the bladder's subconscious signals at night.
And the daytime data.
Yes. We explored the complex sensory world of ASD, where hyposensitive interoception and monotropic hyperfocus can result in up to 37% of kids experiencing daytime accidents, completely detached from the physical reality of their own bodies.
We moved from viewing those statistics as mere data points to understanding them as a mandate for changing how we parent and educate.
We dismantled the simple behavior myth,
Demonstrating why reward charts fail miserably when faced with neurological realities, and why structural supports like timed voiding and conditioning alarms are the medically sound approach.
and finally, we arrived at the core truth of the source material. Understanding this brain-body connection is how we protect a child's self-esteem. It's how we replace discipline with deep medical validation.
Which leaves us with a broader perspective to consider as we wrap up.
What's the final thought here?
We've spent this time unraveling the biological connection between a seemingly physical behavioral issue, incontinence, and the neurological realities of ADHD and ASD.
Right.
We have seen how deeply intertwined the brain's unique wiring is with fundamental physical bodily functions, and how easily adults misinterpret a sensory failure as a behavioral choice.
It really makes you pause and rethink everything we hastily categorize as bad behavior.
Exactly. So the thought I want to leave you with to mull over long after you finish listening to this deep dive is this. If neurodevelopmental differences are so undeniably tied to something as basic and physical as bladder control, how many other behavioral struggles in childhood are being misunderstood?
Oh, that's a big question.
When a child exhibits extreme picky eating, sleep resistance, or refuses to wear certain fabrics, how often are we looking at quiet, invisible neurological disconnects?
Just waiting to be understood.
How many everyday childhood struggles are simply waiting for our scientific empathy rather than our discipline?